Okay, awesome. I'm going to keep this participant list up in case anyone else comes in, but I might as well kick us off since we're a minute past. Hi, everybody. Welcome to all new and familiar faces to our Cultivators ERG panel event. If you've never heard of Cultivators Community before, we are an online Slack community built for change makers who like to share ideas about what they're up to at work and mobilize for change within their organization. So if that sounds like you and you haven't joined our community yet, there's over 350 of us hanging out in Slack, and we'd like to invite you to join. I'm going to actually throw the link into the chat, and you can fill out the form and we'll get you in there so that we can continue this discussion afterwards. We have a shorter event today, 45 minutes as opposed to an hour that we usually block off. So I'm going to dive right in. This is going to be a super fluid discussion about creating, growing, and sustaining ERG's employee resource groups over time. One that we hope the audience will help craft through questions of their own. So be thinking about the types of things you want to hear from, especially once our panelists introduce themselves and introduce the groups that they work with. And you can always feel empowered to submit a question to the chat at any time so that we see it throughout the event. I feel really fortunate to have these 4 panelists with us today who have all worked on previously or are currently working within their respective companies with specific employee resource groups. So we have Steph Hausner from Thornburg, Leslie Shee from Reynolds, Stephanie Trevino, formerly at KBR, and Chris Anderson at Guru. And they will all introduce themselves in a moment here. Actually, the moment is now. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Steph to start us off, to introduce herself really quickly and then pass it along the group. Steph, the mic's yours.
Great. Thank you, Molly. My name is Steph Hausner. I'm in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I work primarily in marketing at Thornburg Investment Management. But 3 years ago, I launched and founded our first employee resource group at our firm. It's called Women of Thornburg. It's a women's group, and our focus is to help provide the platform for connection and resources for women hoping to grow their careers and like personal development. So I'm excited to talk more and to hear from everybody. I can pass it along to Stephanie now.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Trevino. I worked for KBR, which is in the energy and construction industry for 20-something years. And as you can guess, the energy industry as well as construction is a very male-dominated industry. I worked on, those mega projects where you build a big LNG plant or a refinery. And because of that experience, I founded our first ERG at KBR, and it was a woman's ERG. And the goal of our ERG was to really kind of help women take that step from, say, a manager level to director and executive level, because we were really losing women in that group. And that became kind of the impetus for KBR's DE&I program overall. And I will throw it over to Leslie.
Hi, Leslie Shee here. I'm joining from New York. I work at Reynolds. Currently, I'm the global co-chair for Asian Inclusion Network. So Reynolds is a consulting firm. We are not a large firm, only about 1,500 employees, but spread around 48 offices. So we started ERG this year, still learning and very excited to, join Steve boot camp and learn a lot there. And happy to be here for you all.
And Chris, over to you.
Yeah, I passed the button to Chris. Sorry, Chris Anderson.
Hey, I'm Chris. I work for a company called Guru, which is an internal knowledge management software company based in Philadelphia. I started an ERG called the Solidarity ERG at Guru a little over a year ago. And the purpose of it was really to create opportunities for anyone at our company to learn, reflect, and take direct action to really fight systemic racism, oppression, et cetera. So we've been going for about a year, and we actually recently kind of moved out of our standard ERG program, and it's now called a Solidarity Guild. So happy to talk more about that and learn with everyone.
Excellent. Thanks so much for your introductions. My name is Steve Garguilo. I will be moderating our discussion today. We'll try to keep it as little panel-ish as possible, because that word is like, I don't know, it gives me PTSD from like too many bad conferences, but it'll be a conversation. And my hope is that the conversation is not just me asking questions, but also anybody else who's on the line. The reason that this is a normal Zoom and not like a broadcast is that you're welcome to in chat anytime, pop in any questions that you have, and then I may or may not have the opportunity to call on you to ask those as we keep the conversation going. So let's start by going through this kind of continuum of thinking about creating, growing, and sustaining communities. Each of you shared a little bit about the ERGs that you are involved with or have been involved with. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about just like its genesis. I think for each of you, actually, you've been involved at the beginning, which isn't always the case. Sometimes you're coming into something that's already been created. But I'd love to hear about some of the challenges getting started. So I think a lot of people know like, oh, here, you know, generally speaking, here's what I did. I brought some people together and whatever, but like, I'd love to hear about some of the challenges that you faced. And then we can popcorn around if someone has a different challenge that they experienced. So I'll let whichever of you decide to go first based on whoever unmutes first here. Stephanie, thank you. And we'll kind of go around on some of the challenges with getting an ERG off the ground when nothing exists yet.
So I'd say, I don't know how typical my process was, but I had just come back from a global leadership conference, and I was really just inspired by what other companies were doing. And because I was working for KBR, Fortune 500, I knew that any movement to get off the ground would really need some senior level help. And so, of course, I went to the CEO. Now, that's a pretty unusual step, but it worked. I don't know that it'd work in all instances, but he bought in and let me know that his priority in me starting this group was sustainability. And that really helped to guide me in the organization that we built. His concern was that we would get a lot of momentum and we'd spend 1 year and we'd blow it out and it'd be amazing. And then it would just fizzle off the vine. And as I was checking the website and checking all the things, the website is clearly still marking the day from back when we had that discussion. You know, it's been 6 years. It is now part of the company's core, and it is part of the marketing materials and all the things. And so I'm really glad that I had that conversation. And I think it also gave me a bunch more credibility as I tried to pitch it to the rest of the organization to say, yeah, I talked to the CEO, he's in. Please don't try to squish my mojo right now.
Thanks, Stephanie. So yeah, so one way is kind of the nuclear option, right? Go all the way to the top, get that support, and you know, make it happen, right? Chris, Leslie, Steph, a different challenge that you faced or a different approach in terms of getting started? I'll go to Leslie first. Thanks.
I can share. My start, I would say, wasn't that difficult, fortunately, because there's a general consensus about what needs to be done. And it definitely is something delayed in the overall leadership agenda, what we are supposed to do as a firm. So we started by having a kickoff at the beginning of the year, announcing this is what we are going to do. We're going to create all different inclusion network groups that is for women, for Hispanic, for Asian, other minorities, and Black, etc. And invite people to sign up. I think that was a big bang, was very effective because basically it set a tone for the rest of the organization to say, this is what we aspire to do. But at the same time, they give us a lot of autonomy as to how we're going to operate. So me and my co-chair, Adeline, who's based in Hong Kong, we strategized to see how we can lift it off the ground. We started with 40 members and currently grew that to almost 80 now. I would say there's a lot of different interest there. The challenge, I would say, how we get organized better on the year one. So we talked to different groups about what is the vision, what do you want to like to accomplish through this ERG. Because people coming to this ERG with very different set of expectations. Some just want to get to know other colleagues who are sitting in Madrid or in Dubai. They just never had got the chance to talk to each other, but through us, which is fine as well. But also we want to bring to the agenda some meaningful topic for them to be uncovering. One example is that next week we'll be host the event, a colleague, actually two colleagues from South Asia to share us what is their favorite comfort food, what is the history around that. That's an example. Doesn't have to be business related, but something to get to know other cultures appreciate that as such. So hopefully that answers you, Steve.
Great, thanks, Leslie. Yeah, and we'll get into more of that from a programming perspective. I appreciate that, is really good. Like what I'm hearing is some of the differences between Stephanie and Leslie's approaches, right? In Stephanie's case, this was, I have this idea, how do I make this happen? Leslie, in your case, it was like the organization decided as part of a strategy, this is going to happen. And now it's go do it, help make it happen. Chris, I think yours is maybe a little bit more like Leslie's or kind of in between. Can you talk about kind of how you got off the ground?
Sure. Yeah. And just for context, so we had a structure for ERGs before I got started with ours. So there was a formal kind of documented process. If anyone wanted to start an ERG, here's how you apply, et cetera. So that was really helpful. That was already kind of in place through our people ops team. So myself and one other teammate kind of put our heads together, and we saw a need for creating more opportunities to mobilize direct action across our organization. And I think in terms of challenges, I think what was hard for us is it was voluntary. That's how our ERGs are structured currently. So I think creating enough capacity for myself and my teammate who started and rallying other people to get involved and to help shoulder some of the work to actually organize, facilitate, et cetera, and do that in a way that's sustainable. I think that was definitely a challenge, and it's still a challenge, frankly. But that's probably the biggest one. And, we got some good momentum built early on in terms of, laying out our programming, what we wanted to accomplish, getting really clear about our mission, et cetera. But again, kind of creating enough structure for more people to get involved and actually getting people to take some leadership in it. That was probably the biggest challenge, just from like growing it and making it sustainable.
And Chris, I'm curious because your group is focused on solidarity, which often, it can often be the case that ERGs are very focused on kind of specific identities, kind of specific groups of like, hey, we're an ERG for X. Yours feels a little bit broader. And so I'm curious how that evolved and like how some of those conversations early on led to you saying, this is the focus.
Yeah, for sure. And even when we started, myself and my teammate were like, this doesn't really fit the mold perfectly of what an ERG is really intended to do. However, this is the structure that we have that will kind of enable us to just get some momentum going and get some work going and start to like do the more meaningful work that we wanted to do. So we kind of went in with that lens of knowing that it's kind of a little bit of a different fit because it's really inclusive. Anyone can join, where most ERGs are very much designed intentionally for folks who share an identity, where this was open to anyone to get involved. And it actually wasn't until I had a conversation with someone who led an ERG at Zapier, and she had mentioned like, oh, we have ERGs and we also have a Solidarity Guild and we have a DEI Guild, and they kind of function a little bit differently, but collaborate really tightly. And that gave me it was like a light bulb moment, because I was like, oh, great, we could kind of do like a light rebrand, still for all intents and purposes, operate the same way with the same mission. However, be really clear that it's not really an ERG, and let's not dilute kind of the value and the importance and what it means to be an ERG. But we actually work really closely with our ERGs now to make sure that we're like connected, we're hearing the needs, the voices from like all the different groups at our company, and we really operate to like amplify, okay, there's a need coming up, how do we support or amplify that? Same with our DEI committee. So it's very much a collaborative effort that we've moved into, and we design our programming like in close coordination with those other groups.
Great, thanks. Yeah, Stephanie, go ahead.
I was going to ask Chris, how many ERGs do you have at your company?
We have, I think, 5 or 6 right now.
So the ERG construct was well in place and solid when you guys started?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And do you remember what your first ERG was?
I think it was our Blackett Guru ERG,
okay,
if I'm not mistaken. I'm not positive on that, but I'm pretty sure.
Okay. I'm just curious.
Well, let's rapid fire down the panel. So Chris said 5. Stephanie, how many? Steph, Leslie, how many ERGs in your organizations?
We have like 7.
7?
The varying size, of course.
We have 3.
3?
And so mine was the first one, and now there is an LGBTQ ERG as well.
Okay, 2. Yeah, and then I know that in some organizations, so Carlo's on the line from Takeda. Carlo, your organization has how many TRGs?
Yes, hi everyone. We have 10.
10, yeah.
Yeah.
So different organizations are in different places, but that's what's cool about it. And what I heard from those 3, right? So there was the Stephanie, hey, I have this idea, I want to make this happen. The Leslie, it's a strategy, work to make it happen. Chris, here's something I want to do. There's a construct that works for this. I'm going to do it within that construct, maybe co-opt it, and then maybe change it, and we'll get to that, right? And then Steph, I'm curious to hear kind of your journey and experience with some of the challenges that came with it.
Yeah, so I guess in contrast to Chris, the ERG that we launched was the first ERG at our firm, like Stephanie. And because of that, there was no like roadmap or anything. It gave us a lot more flexibility, I think, especially in defining what we wanted this to be. And I think that was really helpful for me because I had a clear vision of what I wanted to do with Women of Thornburg. I think like Stephanie, I was inspired by seeing other resources at other firms and like the coastal cities, you know, like there's just like so many more opportunities for people, and being in New Mexico, we're a little bit more isolated. So I think having a clear vision of what I wanted to do for our ERG was really helpful, especially because it was our first one. I think there was some hesitancy throughout the firm in launching this because part of what we were trying to address was some like sludge within the company culture and just distrust. And so like in launching an ERG, it was like, is this going to be isolating for men? Is this going to be like a men hating group? You know, just like, how do we infuse this with positivity and just like really focus on growth? And so, and having that sort of like at our base structure, I think was really helpful because there was some questions along the way as we got launched. And just having that sort of focus throughout, just that we're here to help, like we're here to help the whole company through empowering women, and just like staying focused on that, I think really it helped us. There were several like concerns that came up along the way, but just having that focus, I think was really good. And having the time, like now we're finishing up our 3rd year with this ERG, and now we are much more a part of the company culture. We're part of like recruiting events. It's part of our branding now, part of our identity as a company. And I think just staying focused on that initial sort of positivity has been really helpful.
Thanks, Steph. And I kind of want to move there in terms of where each of your ERGs are focused or have been focused, because there are so many things, you know, you read about what different ERGs do. Some are very focused on like, hey, we're set up to address kind of internal challenges. We're put together in response to some issues happening. Or sometimes it's about talent attraction, or sometimes it's about talent retention. Sometimes it's about growing a category outside the company. It's completely focused externally. Sometimes it's in response to something happening outside the company and creating a space for it. Sometimes it's related to product development. Like there are so many things you could be focused on. And oftentimes, if you try to focus on all those, it might not be super successful. So I'm curious to hear from each of you kind of where you have focused, if that's evolved in terms of what your ERG's like mission is. And maybe Stephanie, yeah, if we want to kick us off, thanks.
So as I mentioned, ours really started, so there's a, I guess, a split between what my motivation was and then how I sold my motivation to the overall corporation. So my motivation was certainly that at that point in my career, I was in my late 30s and I was seeing all of these amazing women leave. And they weren't leaving for any stereotypical reasons. They were leaving because they were hitting a ceiling in their department. And there was a great job to hop over to somewhere else where they could continue to move up the ladder. So again, I'm in energy. So I had friends leave for Shell. I had friends leave for Baker Hughes, all equally Fortune 500 giant corporations that were doing better than us. And my personal motivation was I wanted to stop losing these awesome women. I mean, they were my lunch buddies, right? Like it just, for personal reasons, they needed to stay. But the way I sold this to the overall organization was, again, there's the retention level, but there's also, let's look at our clients, right? So I did research with BP, which was one of our major clients, and they had, I want to say 8 to 10 ERGs already in place. all over the world. And so I could use that as a model to say, look, our clients are doing this. We're doing major projects with them, and they're going to expect our teams to look more diverse, right? They're tired of completely white male dominated teams because that's what we give them. They've recognized within their own organizations, they've started ERGs. So then our next question is going to be, what are you guys doing to keep up the pace? And who do we want to work with? And so that's kind of, although there was the completely selfish motivation on my part, there was this is how we get the company to embrace it. Leslie, what was yours?
I'm glad that you brought a point on the client side, because I totally agree with that. We are not isolated entities, right? We grow and thrive in a business community. So we work with client firms across all industry, and some clients definitely are far ahead of us that we can learn from. I know, like financial service firm, they have many pre-established ERG because of course the size. We definitely want to learn and some of those best practices that we don't have to reinvent the wheel from scratch, but we got to start sometime. I believe that with the pandemic, that's the extra push that we are so all working remotely. So the connection between colleagues is far less than used to be. So there's also a compelling reason to head a ERG to connect with each other, which I believe that give us even extra momentum and push toward the successful. So some people join us just be able to connect with each other. And of course, retention is a big word these days. We want to retain the best talent we can, and just rely on just the boss, the immediate teammates may not be enough. They may want to know people beyond the immediate working groups. So I believe that ERG also fill that gap successfully, hopefully, or effectively.
So what I'm hearing from Stephanie and Leslie, and correct me if I'm wrong, is like retention was your like primary drivers, at least at the beginning. And you can correct me on that. But like, I'm curious from Steph and Chris too, like the 5 words or less like goal, was it retention, something else, like in terms of focus?
I think for us, it's sort of shifted. At first, it was that like personal growth and community. I would say those 2 things. Well, and like professional growth, personal and professional growth and community, like building those things up. So that was our basis for like getting started. And now I saw Jill's question in the chat. And I thought that was really interesting about like, how do we want to like communicate back to the rest of the firm? And I'm thinking more now about like how we want to be a resource to the firm about how to, like, I guess maybe now it is retention. Like, how do we inform managers about the experience of women at our firm? How do we inform the like senior level management about what it's like? So that's something else I've been thinking more about. And I think if we're doing that now through communicating internal statistics about the growth of a woman's career at Thornburg and what that looks like. But that is something that I'm thinking more now about, is how do we be a resource to the firm, primarily to help retain women.
Steph, that's an interesting thought, because as we started ours, we really had a lot of discussions about being a resource group too, and about being, we at times thought we would try to call ourselves like a business group in order to make it seem, to try to get involved more in the overall business decisions, right? To say, look, we have this group of people that are together, and if you have a specific problem within the organization or something like that, bring it to us, right? Let this group try to figure it out. Don't just assume that our ERG is just about us getting to know each other, right? We really felt like we had to sell it to the organization. We continued on the value proposition a lot because it wasn't established yet and it was so new. And so we would offer up anything we could to say, look, here's what we can bring to you, or here's a session that we're going to do for our membership, but we'll do it for everybody. And just to kind of continually give back to the organization to keep our support up.
Would you have like focus groups for that? Or it sounds like maybe there were like focused conversations, or would you like throw out a question to like your broader like community? What would that look like?
So there were times where we had a board, right? And there were times when someone on our board or somewhere within our membership would have a curiosity, right? So I remember one time there was one of our board members that said, I really don't understand our financials. Like our third quarter financials are coming out right now, and I really don't understand them. How many people within our organization or within the broader organization do you think understand what these financials mean? And so we put on a session that was with our CFO, and it was understanding our financials. What do they mean back to me personally in my own job? What does the market believe about this? What does it say about our company? And so it was beneficial for all employees, but it kind of started from an idea, and it also raised the profile of the people that were part of that with the CFO, right? They got to have that relationship as they built that. We also started we attempted a book club, right? Which didn't necessarily go well. So we modified it, and we modified it to being a book club. The books were chosen by a member of our executive team. And so that member had to attend the book club, right? So again, if it was your general counsel, she picked a book and said, this is my choice. You have a month to read it, but only about 10 or 15 people would get to go. That way you'd have a small group chat. And so your benefit to your members is, yay, I get to know this executive. Your executive gets to know these folks, and you get to learn about whatever topic it was. And so a lot of ours were designed for, increasing general business knowledge and things like that. We were never, at least while I was there, we weren't successful in asking for a specific business problem, like, hey, we're having trouble marketing this particular product. Do you guys have ideas? That was always our dream scenario, but that still hadn't happened.
Thanks, Stephanie. So, Steph, you mentioned Jill's question. I kind of wanted to go there, and Harris, I see you. I'm going to get there too. It's one of my favorite topics on data. But let's talk about kind of how focus of ERG relates to kind of the relationship between ERGs and DEI teams. So in our last Cultivators Community event with Coltrane Stansberry, who's from a DEI team, we talked about this emergent tension sometimes between the central DEI functions, which are all of a sudden getting staffed up, in the last year and a half, and ERGs that maybe have been in situ for some time. And now these DEI teams saying, well, here's what I want you to focus on. And the ERG lead saying like, well, who are you? Where'd you come from? Like, this is what we do. So like, I'd be interested to hear from some of you, your relationships with central DEI teams, if there is one, and kind of what that looks like. What's the give and take there? And maybe Chris, you go first.
Yeah, great question. In my experience, we haven't run in, or I'm not aware of that running into that tension. I can totally understand how that might happen. I think our DEI committee, we've organized around different pillars, and one of them is specifically designed to support our ERGs. So it's more about like, hey, what are the needs coming from our ERGs, and how do we best support them and set them up for success and resource them, et cetera. Where it almost sounds like the way you teed up the question, there's scenarios where the DEI group is almost like saying, hey, we want you to accomplish X goal, and it's more of that direction, where I think we're just structured a little bit differently and have kind of different expectations. For me, it comes down to having shared goals, though. What are the outcomes we're driving towards? What's important for us to optimize around? And then I think I can't imagine it being terribly productive to not have open lines of communication and collaboration between ERGs and the DEI group. But I think in my experience here, like having that kind of shared North Star, like, hey, what are we trying to accomplish, helps make for productive collaboration there. But it's, very much still a work in progress here for sure.
And Chris, maybe the other part of Jill's question, and then I want to hear from some others on this too, is how are the ERGs in your guild like seen? Is it very much is it a nice to have and people can spend time on it if they can make time, whatever, or like, and maybe it depends on people's managers and all that kind of stuff, but how are they kind of seen throughout the organization?
I think generally we have a culture that's very supportive of folks like spending work time, either participating in the ERGs or the solidarity events that we put on, or leading. So there's that expectation. There's also expectation of like, hey, talk to your manager and get that, like have an open dialogue. If you're leading an ERG, like have that conversation maybe beforehand, make sure like there's clarity there. And I'm rereading the question here. Sorry, what was it? How do they influence the DEI strategy?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think there's a million parts to the question, but yeah, if you have something else on that.
For at least for our solidarity group, we are one of our, we started having chairs, and one of the people is directly responsible for getting input from our ERG leaders and finding out, hey, what's on the roadmap, how can we best support, et cetera. So it's like explicitly, that position is explicitly designed to collaborate directly with our ERGs and get that input. That'll inform our programming schedule and what we're going to focus on. And then like I said, for our DEI group, similarly, there's a pillar, and that they have that express intention. So it's very much directionally aligned between them. So yeah, ERGs kind of fit in our core part of our DEI work, really focusing on how do we create an inclusive culture here.
And Steph, how about at Thornburg, the, either or both of the kind of how it's seen, as well as any of that like tension between central DEI, if there is one?
Yeah, like for us, as far as how we interact with our DEI committee, it's evolving. The DEI committee was founded 2 years ago, and we've been working more on the governance structure of that this past year. And part of that has been providing more structure as far as like how the DEI committee interacts with the ERGs. Before, we were all like doing our own thing, and now we're trying to get it much more like streamlined to have like that collaboration. At this point, like all the heads of the ERGs do meet with the DEI committee to discuss what they're doing. There's not like any sort of like oversight or like micromanagement, I guess, from the DEI committee as to what we're doing. I am really curious to see how that evolves. If eventually they're like, these are our 3 goals for like 2022, how can you help us make these things happen? That's not happening right now, where we're receiving that sort of information from our DEI committee. It's much more like, I guess, shared information and collaboration. If we have an event that we're working on with Women of Thornburg, we'll tell the DEI committee and the other ERGs about it, and maybe they'll give us some information about like, I don't know, maybe like speed bumps we might have missed before, or like, I don't know, they'll just give us a better perspective on how to make things more efficient and effective. But at this point, that's all still evolving.
And Leslie, I'm curious because Chris and Steph, in their examples, they started bottoms up, so it's natural that it would kind of feel that way. From one that started top down, what's that like?
Well, we have a fairly new DE&I function in our firm. So the head of DE&I was recruited just a few months ago. So she established and building up that function together with having an arm on the internal communication, another arm in the external marketing side. So far, we don't have tension, yet, as we kind of have a monthly leadership kind of get together with the DE&I and share some of our challenges and things that we see in the firm that could be done. So this is a function that we are building over time. So first, back to your point on the data strategy, we need to have a good set of data. And the goal is that the longer term, we want to have a diversity goal in each function that they can actually look up to and be able to accomplish that. So that is pretty much the focus DE&I is working on. On the programming side, they just leave that to each of the ERG. We don't even call it, ERG. We just call them inclusion network, because we want to encourage dialogues within the firm for that purpose.
Thanks, Leslie. So Stephanie, that's kind of where I wanted to go next, and you can feel free to, if there's anything you want to add in that previous discussion, but we have this question from Harris around data. Everybody's focused on data, and ERGs and inclusion networks and whatever you call them, right, are going from being, more loosey-goosey and kind of nice to have towards having some of these clear metrics. And I'm curious, for one that's like 6 years mature, like you've led, how you've defined kind of metrics and data and what you look at, what is that space to you?
So when we started, we knew that we would need the data. And so we had to reach out to HR and all that, because no one had compiled that before. The closest that we had was for government compliance for projects, like working with the government. So it was a completely new sphere for us and getting permission to even touch the information, right? And so we threw that out, we pulled it together and we showed the company just to kind of, there was the shock and awe value happening there of, right, look at what these numbers say. So we obviously had the goal of increasing that participation, that those representation levels at every level of the organization. And I would say now there's probably different metrics today, but as I look back, kind of even on the current corporate website and kind of promotion for the ERG, I think it's pretty amazing that they're still saying, I found this on the website, since 2016, the proportion of female representation in the KBR board of directors and ELT has increased by 23% and 19% respectively. So they're realizing the numbers that we started with, they're trying to use those as their metrics because we do have them, we have that information going back, and hopefully there's a lot more data now to number crunch and do even better.
It also always feels good when like one of the metrics that you report on that you helped make happen, like makes it to the company website. It's like, yay, right?
Yeah.
So
I love it.
Kudos on that. Chris, curious kind of metrics from your standpoint, and if there are kind of established ones for the other ERGs and kind of how you've developed those.
Currently for our ERGs, I'm not aware of hard accountability metrics. I think each group probably has their own goals, but it's not something that is like bubbled up and shared more broadly that I'm aware of at the ERG level. However, our DEI committee very much does have clear goals. And part of, I think, the difference in my mind is ERGs are voluntarily run. They're, again, designed to be safe spaces for groups who are within an identity. And I think it's just like an extra level. This is just my own view, like an extra burden to say like, oh, we need to like prove out at our current stage, these like show this data and show these outcomes. We're just not quite there yet. With separately though, for our DEI committee, it's like there is compensation tied to folks who are involved in that group. And there's a little bit higher accountability. So it's a little bit of a different set of expectations. So we do have those goals. I would say for my group, for the Solidarity group, we're looking at, how do we get engagement? So we're looking at, for each of our programs, how many people are showing up? What does that look like ultimately? Because we're trying to drive impact. I think eventually we want to, a lot of our programming is around direct action. So we'll have curated sessions where we're like saying, hey, here's an hour where everyone can get involved around this specific topic. And here's a list of actions that we can take. Ultimately, I think we want to get closer to being able to understand, hey, how many actions did we actually take and what did that look like over time? We haven't quite gotten to instrumenting that just yet. But yeah, I think our different groups, I would imagine our Solidarity groups, or excuse me, our different ERG groups are looking at some level of engagement and membership, but it's, again, it hasn't really bubbled up to any kind of widespread accountability reporting.
Thanks. Yeah, and Leslie mentioned our community accelerator. This is a topic that we spend a lot of time in when we're working with ERG leaders on kind of what's the right data. I have a point of view on this from my research. I'm just going to drop a blog post into chat on some of the different metrics that I'm seeing people use in terms of measuring ERGs. And then Steph, just curious how how you're measuring as well.
Yeah, so I would say that our metrics are very much dependent on HR and what they're getting. So that's just, that's the data set that we have to work from. I'd be like very curious to see representation throughout the different levels of positions that we have at Thornburg. Like, we're an investment management team, so I'd be very curious to see what our track record has been on the portfolio managers, to see like what that looks like. But like, unfortunately, we're sort of limited to what we can get from HR. Internally, I would say that we do sort of what Chris does and like look at the engagement levels of events that we put on, and that's another way that we can like be more in control of the data that we're getting. But otherwise, we're dependent on what we get from HR. They've been pretty good. They're beginning to get more relaxed in sharing the information with us. I think at first there was some hesitancy, just like nervousness about the transparency. But I think they're seeing that it's more and more accepted and expected of companies to share that.
Yeah, curious, maybe just show of hands from the panelists, like who's getting some data from HR to help you, whether it's PII level 1 of just like some information about, the individuals, or if you're able to get like the personally identifiable information level 2, where it's like maybe people are self-electing to share gender or nationality or that kind of stuff. Like, it's helpful sometimes as an ERG leader to know who am I touching and who am I supporting. But HR can be very sensitive about giving an employee access to some of that kind of information. So curious who might be getting some of that data now or who isn't. Yeah, I kind of expected this kind of response. Yeah, it's definitely an emergent space in terms of trying to put governance on that kind of stuff. And HR and central DEI teams tend to be the gatekeepers of some of that, and figuring out the ways to work with them that you can get access to the right types of that data to help inform your decision making while not compromising the integrity of the organization and of your colleagues' data that should or shouldn't be shared is definitely an emergent kind of space.
One of the ways that we worked with it is to be very specific about what we were looking for, right? So at my organization, we had job levels. And there's a certain grouping of job levels that applies for, say, a manager level, right? And for this level. And so what we did is we said, look, we're looking for, on a first pass, just give us, you don't have to give us identifiable information from anybody, just give us a proportion, right? How many employees do we have at level 50? And what's the percentage of male versus female? And so we kind of started with that because we knew that was data that we could share back to the organization and then would be easily transferable. And then later, that becomes the model, and HR is more willing to share the next data when they realize it hasn't caused any privacy issues or anything like that.
Thanks. Well, and I'm just noticing the time. I want to be respectful of the 45 minutes that we asked for. Carla, Alex, Sarah, I see this conversation around change management in chat. That's a conversation I'd love to continue in our Cultivators community space in Slack, because I think it's, all of these things we could continue to dive into more, but really appreciate everyone's willingness to chat on this stuff today. Chris, thank you for the resources that you shared. And I will hand back to Molly to close us out here. And we're having a little bit of difficulty hearing Molly, so I could be the Molly stand-in here to just say thank you for joining us all. We hope that you'll join us in the Cultivators community. The link is right there, and this is the kind of conversation that we want to be having on the regular, right? As you're working on building your communities, as you're thinking about some of these different kinds of things, there's a space of a few hundred of us that are talking about this stuff every day. So join us there. Thank you for your willingness to participate in this conversation. Huge thank you, Chris, Stephanie, Steph, Leslie. And everybody have a phenomenal Tuesday.